Hey guys, it's ItsSMOGONdevo here, back at it with another showcase. Finally getting this one out to you. This will be the Tentacruel showcase. Tentacruel's a really interesting mon. It has a ton of positive matchups, more than you'd believe. It can take on almost anything in this meta. You know, the two major Quag and Venusaur counters, or their groups, so the water and bug, fire, and flying types. It also does pretty well versus Quagsire and Venusaur. It can beat half the Confusion users. Really, it's just kind of worried about the electrics. I'll get into all the matchups and all of that stuff more specifically, but Tentacruel is a really good Pokemon for this cup. And it's actually able to be this good with really just Acid Spray. So I'm going to go ahead and give you a quick overview of Tentacruel and where it fits in the meta. Going to go over these matchups, then we're going to jump into some team building, followed by a few battles just to show it off, and then I'm going to go ahead and give you some closing thoughts. So let's just jump into this, and I'll meet you over there. So finally starting on this Tentacruel video. A few things before we actually get started. I made a few changes to the actual layout to my discussion and showcase videos. Basically, I just kind of made the phone screen overlay a bit smaller, and I increased the window where my computer is so you can see the Sims a bit better. I figure the main point of this portion of the video is to actually show you the Sims, so I wanted to make that as big as possible so you guys could follow along a bit easier. So I'm liking that, and you know, the banners weren't needing to be that big either. But yeah, this is going to be the new layout. Still pretty similar to the last one, but I find it a bit cleaner. But that's not important. Let's get into the actual focus of the video, Tentacruel. So what we're going to be running is Poison Jab, Hydro Pump, and Acid Spray. In all of my discussions, that's what I'm primarily focusing on. So I don't want there to be any confusion there. You might be able to get away without using Hydro Pump, but I would strongly recommend against it. And I definitely think Acid Spray is 100% necessary in this format. So before I actually get into the Sims with you, I kind of want to go back to that meta chart I had made and give you like a little refresher on Tentacruel and where I kind of fit it into the meta. Okay, so here it is, that meta chart. You may be somewhat hazy on it, but let's just go through it quickly. Gonna give you a quick kind of overview to show you where Tentacruel actually places. So when you're looking at it, it has very similar coverage to the electric users and as well as Azumarill. So it performs kind of like an electric and kind of like Azumarill, but it's a little different. So I guess first we'll kind of examine the electrics and compare that to Tentacruel. So the electric types basically beat this group over here and this group over here. Interesting matchup with Confusion users. You know, they beat one and lose to the other, except in the case of Magneton, which can beat both. But in general, just assume they have interesting matchups here, but they do lose to Quagsire and Venusaur. And that's very similar to Azumarill. You know, Azumarill does that same thing, beats this group and this group. It can beat both Confusion users though, but it does lose to both Quagsire and Venusaur. The difference between Azu and the electrics are that, of course, Azumarill is not going to beat the electric types, whereas the electric types have a bit more of an even matchup amongst each other. Tentacruel, though, is a little bit different than Azu and the electrics. So, of course, it does share that same positive matchup with this group down here, and with the water types over here. Like Azu, it is not so good versus the electrics, but unlike Azu and unlike the electrics, it actually doesn't have horrible matchups with Quagsire and Venusaur. And I'm going to get into that in the Sims as well. But because of that, it's kind of unique, and I think it has a real potential to shine in this meta. There's hardly anything that actually hard counters it or can farm it. So really, it can go positive versus pretty much everything on the field. One other thing, Tentacruel, unlike the electrics, doesn't do bad to Exeggutor. But Slowpoke and Slowbro are a different story. But anyways, let's just get into the actual Sims now. We'll go over everything more in depth. And yeah, so let's just jump into that. Alright, so Quagsire. I did say at the start of this video that Tentacruel usually only needs Poison Jab and Acid Spray. There's actually only 2 times where you actually need Hydro Pump. I still do recommend you to run Hydro Pump with it because it's a very scary thing for a lot of things to face. Even those things that it can beat with just Acid Spray, they likely don't want to take that Hydro Pump. But versus Quagsire, this is one of those times where you do actually need Hydro Pump. It's one of the only 2 times where you actually need it. So I'm going to go over all 3 of the Quagsire sets so you can see that play out. First, let's check out Earthquake. So let's get it off Sandbox and run that sim. You'll see that it's showing Tentacruel losing. This matchup is basically entirely dependent on shielding. So we lose if we take an Earthquake, you'll see. But it does flip around a bit if we decide to shield this Earthquake and take the Stone Edge instead. We're able to actually get to a Hydro Pump after that Acid Spray. And there we actually will be able to take the match versus Earthquake Quagsire. This is of course assuming that they fall for that Acid Spray bait. Let's say that we actually land the Hydro Pump at the start of the match. So take that away. You'll see that Quagsire is able to get another Stone Edge, but we will have a shield at this point. So if they try to Stone Edge twice and decide not to block that Hydro Pump, anticipating perhaps an Acid Spray, that's really going to cost them the match. They could decide to Earthquake first. In that case, it might just be a better idea to shield the first charge move as Tentacruel if you know it's an Earthquake Quagsire. But they won't be able to Earthquake twice. Yeah, so versus the Earthquake variant of Quagsire, this match is really just dependent on whether or not you take the Earthquake from Quagsire or Quagsire takes the Hydro Pump from you. Quagsire shouldn't be able to build to 2 Earthquakes. But I do consider, again, this Quagsire to be the worst version of the 3. I just prefer the Sludge Bomb damage and the Acid Spray shenanigans. But I just wanted to kind of give a better story and show you every instance, or at least every type of Quagsire, to let you know that Tentacruel is still a threat, no matter what the Quagsire is. So let's check out Acid Spray Quag now. Run the sim. So you'll see that it actually does show us losing here. That is, of course, if we fall for the Acid Spray bait and take that Stone Edge. Changes a bit if we decide not to fall for that bait and block this Stone Edge up here instead. Then all of a sudden, it's not so one-sided. So if we wait a little bit longer, we're actually able to get to our Hydro Pump here. And this will be before Quagsire gets its 3rd move, although it is very close. But yeah, you'll see that Tentacruel is able to get that Hydro Pump off and actually knock out the Quagsire. So as long as you don't fall for that Acid Spray bait, Tentacruel is in a good position if it can also land that Hydro Pump. But let's switch things up a bit, and let's say that they decided to take the Hydro Pump here and not shield. You'll notice a very similar result actually. It does change a little bit. So then we're able to get an Acid Spray off. And they will actually be able to get a Stone Edge. So in this case, they can actually get 2 Stone Edges and an Acid Spray off if they decide to take that first Hydro Pump. But they will have to expend a shield at the end to block that Acid Spray, or else it will actually end very narrowly, and depending on the IVs, Quagsire may not come out on top. So Acid Spray is a little bit more challenging for Tentacruel to face, but even worst case scenario, you're getting Quag extremely low. You've basically negated it from the rest of the battle. And I think the same kind of thing applies here. You just don't want to take that Hydro Pump as the Quagsire. Okay, so let's move on to the last Quagsire set, the Sludge Bomb variant. This one is most similar to Acid Spray. The only difference is really, again, you don't want to take that Stone Edge or shield it when you can. But in this case, if you don't fall for the bait and let the Sludge Bomb hit, it's even better for you, because now you're not, now your defense isn't lower, so the mud shots aren't hurting as much. And you can actually walk away with a much better result in the end of the match. Just skipping ahead a little bit, messing around with the sims there. If you do land that Hydro Pump first, and the Quagsire decides to Stone Edge 3 times, the match will end in a tie. If it does decide to go for a Sludge Bomb at any point, then it can actually walk out with a little bit more health. But again, it's similar to that Acid Spray result. It's going to be very low and basically knocked out of this game. I mean, look at its energy levels. Very low energy. So while Tentacruel doesn't have a clear win versus Quagsire, it does put a lot of pressure on it with that Hydro Pump. Quagsire wants to try its best not to take that Hydro Pump. So if we look over at the Venusaur matchup now, this is one where Tentacruel doesn't win, unfortunately, but it can put a really big chip in Venusaur. So for this matchup, you don't need Hydro Pump at all, at least for what I want to show you. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of it. You'll notice these Sims have 127 HP. I'm going to show you what happens really quickly. So run the Sim. You see Tentacruel is losing and Venusaur is left at a pretty good result. And you have another Acid Spray ready, but you're just short of being able to use it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give Tentacruel literally just 1 more health and keeping it around this defense stat. So let me set that up, just give me 1 second. Okay, so it actually now has lower attack, slightly lower defense, but around 140, and literally just 1 more point of stamina. We're going to rerun this sim. Now Tentacruel is actually able to get its second Acid Spray off versus Venusaur, which still doesn't allow it to take the win, but Venusaur is significantly lower than before. So I've spent a lot of time looking at the sims for Tentacruel, and I haven't really been able to find many relevant breakpoints that actually influence a match in any major way, except for this one. When you're building your Tentacruels, you definitely want to make sure you have roughly 128 stamina, if not more. The defense I haven't looked at too closely, but as far as I can tell, you can actually get a little bit lower than this as well. You just want to be making sure that Vine Whip's doing 4 damage and no more. But that's really what separates Tentacruel from something like Azumarill and the Electrics, is just that it doesn't do horribly versus Venusaur and Quagsire, and because of that, it has excellent matchups across the meta. Tentacruel is a threat to almost everything it comes across. So let's put that aside and actually move on to the next little bit. We're going to be checking out the water users. So here it is, Azumarill. The cool thing is that versus all of these water users, you don't need Hydro Pump again. Double Acid Spray usually just does it. I don't really want to run the sims versus most of them. I'll show you Azumarill really quick, but no, it's a non-threat for Tentacruel. It's going to be the same thing with Blastoise and Lapras. DP Lapras, I believe if it lands DP, can tie Tentacruel, assuming Tentacruel doesn't go for Hydro Pump at all. But yeah, really these matchups are very heavily in Tentacruel's favor. The one exception is Politoed, however. Politoed's a little weird, so you can still get this match done with just Acid Spray. So if I run the sim, you'll see that we do lose. That's only because we've taken an Earthquake. Let's shield this Earthquake. Shield it and take the Surf instead. And now we'll be able to get this Acid Spray. Apply the debuff. And I just want to switch around the shielding, so we'll shield this one. Or sorry, we won't shield this one, and we'll shield the second one. Let him hit that Surf. So this matchup, really, it's entirely dependent on shielding, similarly to the Quagsire matchup. If you take that Earthquake, you're done. If you don't take the Earthquake, you just have to double Acid Spray and you'll take it. So it's a bit more in Tentacruel's favor, but Politoed really can build up that energy extremely quick, so sometimes it's a bit harder to tell. The other thing is though, an ideal Politoed can actually get to a second Earthquake on top of that Surf. So that is something to consider. There's a breakpoint somewhere in there. The only thing that I am cautious about with this is finding an ideal Politoed is probably going to be extremely difficult, especially given that you're likely going to have been trading for it. So I guess just to give you a quick overview on the water types, Tentacruel can basically beat all of them. The only thing is it doesn't want to take Earthquake from Politoed. Assuming that Earthquake doesn't connect, your Tentacruel will take the match. So you can see Tentacruel has fairly decent matchups against Quagsire and Venusaur. It doesn't really have any major problems with the water types. So I guess let's look into the other group now, the Bug, Fire, and Flying group. So this is also very similar to the water types. Tentacruel can win almost all of these matchups just with double Acid Spray. I don't want to waste too much time, so I'm not going to show you the sims. But Mantine, Beedrill, and Charizard are essentially non-threats. If you have Hydro Pump, it's even better for you if you land it. There really is only two things in this group that I do want to show you. I want to go over Ninetales and Fortress. So let's check out Ninetales first. So Sims want to show you Feint Attack, but look at Fire Spin. If we run this battle, this is just Acid Spray by the way, we're not even going to look at Hydro Pump. Double Acid Spray takes this match for you. And Ninetales is short of a third Psyshock. So pretty good matchup for you. If you have Hydro Pump, it can potentially be even better. But let's switch Ninetales to Feint Attack and check this out. You'll see that Tentacruel usually isn't actually able to even build to a Hydro Pump. So Feint Attack Ninetales can pose a threat to your Tentacruel. Don't find the Ninetales case that interesting versus Tentacruel. The real interesting one is Fortress in my opinion. So let's check out Fortress. I'm not sure what the general consensus on its moveset is right now. I see a lot of people advocating for the Bug Bite, Earthquake, and Rock Tomb set. I think you need Heavy Slam for baiting potential and a few other matchups as well. But I'll run you through each of the variations. This is the other matchup besides Quagsire where you definitely need Hydro Pump. And it's going to be similar to that Quagsire matchup as well. It's pretty much going to be a win for Tentacruel. I think the issue is that Fortress can't actually get Rock Tomb and Earthquake off, so it would have to choose to just use one Earthquake or go for double Rock Tomb. Yeah, so you'll see that even if it decides to not shield the first move and we go for Hydro Pump, it won't be able to get to Earthquake. We'll have to actually just go for a double Rock Tomb at the end. That still puts it in your favor. So at least versus Earthquake Rock Tomb Fortress, you have a really good shot as long as you land that Hydro Pump. Similar to Quagsire. It does get a bit trickier once you start to run the Heavy Slam variant, because now it has a move that comes out quicker and it can bait you a bit more reliably. So it's largely going to be the same situation though. It's going to be depending on the baits. You know, if you take that Rock Tomb, you might be at a worse position, but as long as you land a Hydro Pump, your Tentacruel is going to come out on top again. It's more or less the same thing with Earthquake. It's just the risk of taking an Earthquake is much higher now. So, if you take an Earthquake, you die. If you land that Hydro Pump, you're in a very good position. It's basically the same thing as Quagsire with Fortress. You need Hydro Pump, definitely. You land the Hydro Pump and you avoid the move you're obviously trying to avoid. Don't fall for the bait and you'll win. Alright, so let's get past that group and now let's check out the Confusion users. So Tentacruel's in a weird place, especially if you're trying to compare it to the Electrics and Azumarill, at least when you're looking at the Confusion users. Tentacruel kind of flips the Confusion matchup when you're looking at it and the Electrics, so it can beat Exeggutor, if not tie it. So let's check that one out really quick. Don't need Hydro Pump for this matchup. Just hit battle. You'll see that it actually goes to a tie. Although Exeggutor has a ton of energy, but it can't use that energy. This is what happens if you try to Seed Bomb. I'll shield it, of course. And then I'll actually come out on top without even having to have used a charge move. Exeggutor's Confusion is just that slow where it doesn't really want to miss the turn. Instead, you just want to be hammering away at Tentacruel. So you will win if it goes for a charge move. And you'll actually win if it decides not to shield your Acid Spray. So, unlike the Electrics, Tentacruel isn't necessarily weak to Exeggutor. But when you look at Slowpoke and Slowbro, that's a little different. So I'll put in the battle here. Doesn't matter how many Acid Sprays you get, Slowpoke will beat this Tentacruel. It can actually farm Tentacruel, doesn't have to go for that side shock. And it's just as bad versus Slowbro. Yeah, Slowbro doesn't have to go for that Ice Beam. It's even worse. So a little bit of a reverse when you're looking at the Electrics. Tentacruel doing much better versus Exeggutor and much worse versus Slowbro and Slowpoke. So Tentacruel doesn't do horribly versus Quagsire and Venusaur, making it a little bit different than the Electrics and Azumarill. But otherwise it has fairly similar coverage. Now it does really well against that water group and the bug, fire, and flying group as well. Weird matchups with the Confusion users, as do most things in the cup. And then of course the other area where Tentacruel doesn't do well would be versus the Electrics. There really isn't a whole lot it can do to the Electrics. One thing to note though, the Electrics, at least when you're looking at Raichu and Magneton, they don't want to take a Hydro Pump. So they 100% need a shield. Let's just check it out. Tentacruel won't be able to get to 2 Acid Sprays, can only get to a Hydro Pump at best. So I'll show that to you. Can only get to a Hydro Pump, so your best odds as Tentacruel is just to go for that Hydro Pump. But if Raichu takes it, it's not looking pretty. All of a sudden you are a major threat to the Raichu. But generally your matchup is not so great as long as they have a shield. Magneton is something else to look at. Magneton being a steel type means it double resists poison, so it does even better versus Tentacruel than Raichu does. It does need a shield as well though, because if you do not shield and you take a Hydro Pump from Tentacruel, it's going to blow you away, or at least tie with you. So that gives us a pretty good look at Tentacruel. Just to review one more time, it's kind of like an Electric and Azumarill, where it's going to have really good matchups here and here. Like Azumarill, it's not going to do so well versus the Electrics, where the Electrics, I guess, have a bit more of an even matchup amongst each other, with the exception of Lantern. It handles the opposite Confusion user as the Electrics, but unlike both the Electrics and Azumarill, it doesn't do horribly versus Quagsire and Venusaur. So in theory, it's got a whole ton of positive matchups and it can really dent almost anything. A lot of teams are actually going to find it quite annoying to deal with, especially when you consider that there's hardly any hard counters to it. Of course, you got the Electrics, Raichu and Magneton specifically, that can pretty easily handle Tentacruel as long as they have a shield. They're not going to want to take Hydro Pump from Tentacruel. The other thing is Slowpoke and Slowbro. They're literally the only thing in this cup that can farm Tentacruel. So Tentacruel has very, very many positive matchups and very few hard counters. Really, I'd only consider Slowpoke and Slowbro the hard counters to Tentacruel, as the Electrics definitely need a shield there. And you saw that it has a good matchup with Quagsire and Venusaur too, and even Fortress, surprisingly. Tentacruel is definitely something to be wary of. It's going to be very annoying for many teams, just again because it has so many positives. I actually really like messing around with it in my playtesting. It's been fun to mess around with. I did, at the end of it, I have decided to not run it, unfortunately. Not because it's a bad mod, but because now that I'm thinking about it and now that I've had some time to mess around with it, I can see that it does require a very specific kind of team composition. So I'm going to jump into the team building portion of the video with you so that I can actually show you exactly like how to build a team around Tentacruel, and then maybe that will kind of illuminate why it doesn't really work on every type of team. So here it is. Building with Tentacruel isn't like building with something like Ninetales. With Ninetales, it's kind of something you can slap on a team near the end or even sub something out. But Tentacruel does require a bit more of a specific team comp, I feel. So that's why I decided to include this team building portion of the video. Normally for most showcases, unless the mod is something I feel is more similar to Tenta, where it needs a more specific, I guess, team, I wouldn't do this, but anyways, this is kind of my thinking and how I went about trying to make some teams. So I'm going to explain that to you, and then I'm going to give you a few sample teams that I ended up creating. Then I'll go over them really briefly, and then we'll just jump into some battles from there. So the type of teams you end up with because of this tend to be kind of controversial. Not really controversial, I wouldn't say, but a lot of the times I ended up with double confusion, just because you're trying to patch out that Quag and Venusaur matchup quite a bit, I find, with Tentacruel. But there is one that I ended up coming up with that didn't need the double confusion. But let's just put that aside for now. Walk you through the steps, and then you can try to build a few teams, and I'll show you the ones that I ended up with. Not to say that you can't run Tentacruel on a team that doesn't kind of follow this format. This is just a good way for you to build around it, or build with it in mind, or at least give you like kind of a starting point so you know where to go and what you should be trying to focus on with your team. So step one is going to be to include Quagsire, Venusaur, and Tentacruel. We're going to start with that as a base, and then we're going to build around it, basically. So before we even get to step two, if you check out this team, first, you should be kind of looking at your Quagsire and Venusaur matchup. So for Quagsire, we have Venusaur, kind of Tentacruel, and the Mirror. We're pretty set on Quagsire, I'd say. Not necessarily strong against it, but not necessarily weak either. For Venusaur though, we only have Venusaur itself, so the Mirror. Quag loses and Tentacruel does lose as well. So first thing you'll notice is that you are weak to Venusaur using these three. So your second step should be to address that, actually. So now let's get to the second step. I chose the Venusaur counters here. So Charizard, Mantine, Ninetales, and Fortress. I actually, when I was going through it, I decided to put this step aside. So I didn't actually settle on any of them right away, but with Fortress later on in this process, I found that including it would actually just make me too weak to opposing Fortress, so I decided to exclude it. That's not to say you can never run Fortress with Tentacruel, but just with the way I was thinking about running it, Fortress seemed like a worse option here. I ended up deciding that I wanted this slot to beat Venusaur and Fortress. So Charizard, Mantine, and Ninetales became the obvious pick for me. So I decided just to go to the next step, and I knew that no matter which one I went with, step two, I was going to actually be a bit weaker to Quagsire. So my next step was to try and patch out that Quagsire matchup. But the trouble with that, if you try to patch out Quagsire specifically and Venusaur specifically, then you end up getting weaker to the other one. So after a bit of thinking, I decided that this slot is probably best suited to a Confusion user, especially given Tentacruel's, not necessarily wins versus Quagsire and Venusaur. You really want to have something to help with both of them. Unfortunately, Confusion users are the only real choice here. So yeah, I have Slowbro in the graphic, but Slowbro does not have the same matchup as Poke or Exeggutor versus Quagsire. It loses. So really, I would be looking at Slowpoke and Exeggutor. And then depending on the one you go with, there is somewhat of a branch off on your team. And also this is kind of where I see Ninetales being a bit less relevant. Because if you go Exeggutor, Quagsire, Venusaur, you have an extremely good matchup versus Electrics. So Ninetales wouldn't necessarily be needed there. If you go Slowpoke, you might want to consider Ninetales again, but not necessary. With Exeggutor teams, you are going to be rather weak to Mantine at this point. But anyways, whichever one you do go with will actually shape the rest of the team. This is also why I excluded Fortress, because with either Confusion User, Tentacruel, and Venusaur, that's a lot of weaknesses to Fortress. So really you only have Quagsire and Mantine, Ninetales, or Charizard. So I had to exclude Fortress because of that reason. I needed something to also buff out that weakness. The last slot does have some variation. You're just really going to be looking at that Quagsire and Venusaur matchup very closely and just making sure you have enough coverage for them. I found that throughout the process when I got to this step, I still was weak to Quagsire and Venusaur. So usually I ended up picking up another Confusion User. So I have some of my sample teams that use Exeggutor and Slowpoke, Exeggutor and Slowbro. Changes a bit, but a lot of the time I found myself going back to Double Confusion just to make up the weakness that Tentacruel would kind of be bringing, or rather lack of reliable coverage, I guess. So get this quick, just do a quick summary of that. You're going to start with Quagsire, Venusaur, and Tentacruel. Your step 2, you're going to be kind of looking at a way to patch out Venusaur and Fortress. Then your step 3, you're going to be trying to work out your Quagsire weakness, and to a degree your Venusaur weakness as well. So you'll definitely end up looking at a Confusion User. Then your last slot, you're going to want to keep in mind your Quagsire and Venusaur matchup, and also your Fortress, and to a degree your Mantine weakness. So let's just jump into some sample teams then. So those are the 3 teams right up there. They all kind of start with Quagsire, Venusaur, and Tentacruel. That's what the QST stands for. So they all kind of go different ways, and by no means are these the only teams that work with Tentacruel, and they actually do each have their own faults. But these are just some examples I gave you while trying to follow my own guide. So I'm just going to walk you through them really quick and try to explain what their weaknesses are, where they can improve, etc. So the first one, you got Quags or Tentacruel, no surprise. This one went with Exeggutor. So it has a very strong core versus electric types. So the next one I chose was Mantine. You could go Zard, but I figured because of that really strong electric resistance, I preferred Mantine, and it also in turn helps with Charizard and Ninetales. The last slot, it was between Slowbro and Ninetales. The one you go with will basically shape your weakness. If you go with Slowbro, you have a very poor Fortress matchup, but the trade-off is that your Venusaur matchup will be good, and also your Mantine matchup will not suffer. Slowbro also does pretty well versus Quagsire. It does lose, but with one Confusion advantage, it can actually take that win, because you'll be able to get your second Ice Beam. So between Bro and Tentacruel, you might be able to play around Quagsire. You also do have Venusaur, Exeggutor, and the Mirror. So perhaps Quagsire isn't that much of a threat, and you are more worried about Fortress. Then I would suggest the Ninetales. The only thing is, in that case, then you do have to watch out for Mantine. Really, you would just have Quag and Tenta and the Mirror for it at that point. But yeah, so going on to the second team. This time I ended up going with Poke and Exeggutor together. Then I just wanted to go straight for Charizard because I needed the hardest possible Fortress win, and Charizard does that. I suppose you also could go Ninetales over here. The issue with this team is that it does kind of have a fort weakness even still. All you really have
forward is your Zard, Quagsire, and then you have to hope you get the Hydro Pump with Tentacruel, whereas you have 3 clear losses. So looking at the last team, you got Quag, Soar, and Tenta once again. This time I went with just Slowpoke, which actually gives you pretty good matchups all around, at least for Quagsire. You might be a little weak on the Venusaur side, so the next thing I looked at was Ninetales. Because I have Slowpoke and Tentacruel, I preferred Ninetales over Charizard or Mantine, just to shore up that electric weakness a little bit more. And that last slot, you're looking for something to deal with Fortress and Mantine, and Quagsire to a lesser extent. So Blast or Toad should do really well in this comp. I think this is my preferred comp of the 3 actually. I don't see a glaring Mantine or Ford weakness with it. So I do prefer this one more, and you know the Quag and Venusaur matchup are kind of balanced. Yeah, these are just kind of sample teams again. I mean, I wouldn't consider any of them perfect. If anything, you can use these as a starting point to try to test Tentacruel, and then, you know, throughout your practice matches, you can swap out what you think doesn't need to be there. I'm still iffy on the double confusion, but I had to make compromises to patch out that Quag and Venusaur matchup. So again, don't take these as like the holy grail of teams, just use them as a starting point. I don't want to spend any more time on this, now I just want to jump straight into the battles, so I'm going to go ahead and take you over there. Alright, here we are with some battles. I'm going to jump straight into these. Not as many battles this time around, but it will have to do. So we lead with Quag into his Quag. Just going to farm up a little bit of energy over here. Waiting to see what he does, as I like to do in the mirror match. So I'm not going to shield his first hit, I know I can take it either way. It is Acid Spray, so now I'm aware that he has an Acid Spray Quag. So I'm going to go for my own Sludge Bomb. Probably should have just Stone Edged. He is able to get to his second charge move quicker, so he goes for a second Acid Spray. I don't shield. Now I'm going to go for the Stone Edge. Doesn't shield it, so we take out a chunk from his health. And, I'm just going to continue farming up some energy and trying to get to another Stone Edge, but I'm just short. So I don't really want to lose any advantage, so I let my Quagsire go down, and I bring in Exeggutor and knock out his Quagsire. Tentacruel is chilling in the back. Farm up some energy and switch out to Tentacruel now on his Zard. He brings out Lantern, so I'm going to actually Acid Spray his Lantern. He doesn't shield it, which is smart. Farm up a little bit more energy. I have to shield this move coming in because Tentacruel cannot take a Thunderbolt. So I'm going to land a second Acid Spray. And I guess my goal here is just to whittle him down as much as possible. And I do knock it out, and then I'm able to have a second Acid Spray ready to go for Charizard. So we get those drops, and now I'm thinking Tentacruel's done enough. So I'm going to let it go down. He actually uses Dragon Claw, so I hang in a little bit longer. But I am going to let it go down. Then I will bring in my Exeggutor. Save that shield just for this reason. He goes Dragon Claw, and then I'm able to knock it out with Confusion damage. Acid Sprays are really coming in clutch, but going into the next battle, leading with Quagsire and Tentacruel and Exeggutor in the back. Just waiting for him to select his team. So we lead Quag into Kingdra. Interesting pick. I've seen a lot of people using it on Acid Spray teams, and it's pretty annoying, I'm not going to lie. So here I just go straight for the Stone Edge. I don't want to bait anything out. Land it. Then I'm building to my Sludge Bomb over here, knowing that it should be able to knock out Kingdra, and it costs me a little bit less energy. He does shield. I'm going to actually let my Quagsire go down. Don't want to burn a shield, as Kingdra's low anyways. We'll bring in Tentacruel and farm up this Kingdra just a bit. Still have the shield advantage. Brings in Meganium, so I'm definitely going to go for this Acid Spray. Now we should be making quick work of the Meganium. Going to shield this move coming in, just in case it's an Earthquake. Was a Frenzy Plant, that's no problem. Switches out Meganium and brings in Charizard. Now I'm going to go straight for the Hydro Pump, no need to bait. And he did not respect that Hydro Pump. The Meganium's going to come back in and go down to the Poison Jab damage. Alright, so next battle we're going to go ahead with an Exeggutor lead. Yeah, those Hydro Pumps can be really scary coming off Tentacruel. I mean, again, there's hardly anything that actually wants to take them. Especially when you're in a positive matchup, if you land that Hydro Pump, it can make really quick work out of whatever's coming in. Hydro Pump's not that far off from Acid Spray either, surprisingly. So a lot of people wouldn't expect you to have one ready in some cases. So here we go, we lead with Exeggutor into Meganium. Interesting matchup. Meganium's supposed to be not weak to the Confusion users. So I'm thinking this is a Frenzy Plant, and it was, so I don't shield it. Just building up some energy. I switch Exeggutor out now that it has some energy ready for Psychic. Shield this move. It was Earthquake, so it's a good thing I did. Just trying to whittle down Meganium with fast moves. Now I do have the Acid Spray. Just building up a bit more. So Blastoise comes in and I go straight for this Acid Spray. Doesn't shield, of course. But I'm actually able to build a little bit higher. I know I can take a Hydro Cannon, so I'm not too worried. Yeah, Tentacruel takes that like a champ. Now I'm going to go for the Hydro Pump on a -2 Blastoise. And actually will pick up the knockout, which is great. Zard comes in and I'm only able to chip it down a bit. Tentacruel really put in some work there. Now Exeggutor is going to come in and burn a shield from Charizard. And that's going to set up my Ninetales. Now we're both at even shields. I don't want to shield this. I know I can take a Blast Burn at least. So it was Dragon Claw. It's a good thing I didn't shield. Now it's just a race to charge moves. I'm going to shield this one just in case of the Blast Burn. He is going Dragon Claw. So I can get this Psyshock off. That's not going to be an issue. Take that last shield. It's going to go for Dragon Claw again, and I will also take that. Now I just have to get to my next Psyshock right here, and I will be able to take this match. Tentacruel basically took out the first 2 targets on its own. So now we lead Tentacruel this time. This is a play I like to make a lot with Tentacruel actually. I find it's a very good lead, surprisingly. As long as you don't land into any of its hard checks, but we lead into Mantine. Very good matchup for Tentacruel. Just gonna go for that Acid Spray, build up some energy towards that. I'm not going to shield the first move. I just wanted to actually see how much damage it would do, and lo and behold, it doesn't do a whole lot. But now we go for the Acid Spray. Doesn't shield. Take another one. Possibly could have expanded shields, but I know Tentacruel is reasonably bulky, so I'll go for a second Acid Spray. Now I'm just able to whittle down this Mantine to death, and I almost have a third Acid Spray ready. You can see me trying to tap towards it. It does go ahead and bring in Fortress, and I'm able to get off an Acid Spray at the very last second and land it on that Fortress. So that's going to actually help me. Now I can bring in Quagsire, farm up some energy, and go for that Stone Edge. I'm not going to shield this, luckily with a Heavy Slam. So this Stone Edge is going to do a ton of damage if it lands. Just shield it, smart move.
Now I should be able to get to this Stone Edge before him. And that will do a ton of damage to Fortress. So he brings in his Quagsire. I just want to do some chip, so I'm going to go for Stone Edge. Doesn't shield. I guess he's not sure what I have in the back. Almost get to that second Stone Edge. Probably should have just Sludge Bombed, but it's okay. Now he's a little bit lower on energy himself. Bring an Exeggutor and I will be able to clean up the match. Shield this move right here. Confusion damage will just chip it down. Goes for another Stone Edge, and of course I do shield, and then there you go, my confusion damage is able to get me the win. Well, there you go. That is going to be the end of the video. I hope you liked it. I did have to cut the battles a lot shorter this time around, just because that team building section of the video took me a little bit too long. But let me know in the future if you guys want me to stick with that, maybe flesh it out a bit more. I don't plan on really doing it in the future just because I would rather focus more on the battles. But yeah, just let me know what you guys think. I'm not really sure. So yeah, Tentacruel is a pretty great mon. It has a lot of positive matchups and can go pretty even with just about anything. Even the 3 things you'd expect to beat it, Fortress, Quagsire, and Venusaur. It's pretty scary, or at least pretty annoying for a lot of other stuff to go up against, except for the electrics. I did decide to cut it on my team, but that's not because it's a bad mon. It's just I do think it requires somewhat of a specific team composition. You can't just slap it on any team like Ninetales. But yeah, that's going to be it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you could please just leave a comment, like, and give me a subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. Take care for now.